Prices have leveled off. Is now the moment to be savvy and invest, or be scared and run away? Hello, sports card investors, and welcome back to another episode of Cards on the Table, our fast-paced talk show where we examine topics all around the world of sports cards suggested by you, the audience. And I could not do this show without these two fine gentlemen on either side of me. Teapot, welcome back, sir.
Hey, Jeff, awesome to be here.
Absolutely. And Hammer, welcome back again.
Great to be back, guys.
And it is great to have you guys back, and we're going to go ahead and jump right into the first topic today. And that is what is going on with the sports card market, and is now the time to invest. So what we've seen is that the first 5 or so months of this year, as many things in the financial markets were pulling back, stocks were dropping, crypto was dropping, etc., we saw sports cards take quite a dive. In fact, a little bit over 15%. It was down the first half of the year. But then we got into the summer. It seemed like optimism around the economy maybe picked back up a little bit, and this sports card market flattened. And of course, now not every element of the market's the same. You see certain types of cards, like football cards, have been relatively hot, while you see other types of cards like modern basketball cards, ultra-modern basketball, which were still down some over this summer. But as a collective, it seemed like the sports card market flattened out. So now we're getting into the fall. We got football that is kicking off literally tonight. Happy start of the football season, people. And we've got basketball starting next month. We got the World Cup coming. Is this that buying window, or should we expect things to fall further in the months ahead? I'm going to start with you, Teapot, on this one.
Well, I think this is the best time of year for sports. And I think much like the broader stock market, there's kind of three dynamics. The quick flip game is still alive and well. There's a lot of sales velocity. There's a lot of cards moving. There's a lot of opportunities there. If you pick the right guys who are going to get hot, I do think some of that opportunity will be there. I also think the long-term game is still there. I think we're now at a price where if you look at historical trends and you try to look at what's happened with the stock market over the decades, now is a point where I would feel comfortable saying, scooping players that I believe in long-term, Jordan, Kobe, Tom Brady, GOATs, even the next tier down, should hold well for the long term, meaning that I think they will appreciate over time. That interim period is what still makes me nervous. And the biggest reason it makes me nervous is because of the uncertainty around the broader markets. These are the things we can't control. Some financial, people are saying there's a bear trap right now. There's a little bit of renewed optimism, and this could be another super bubble or something. Those are the things that we don't know. I think what's most important and what we're trying to do is continue to have a lot of integrity about setting realistic expectations like this kind of conversation. When I prepare for my data dives every week, I try to look at it through a lens of like, what would I be telling my best friends about what's going on in the market and how to be realistic? If you're buying cards that you enjoy and you're a collector and you're a hobby participant in that way, then now is a great time, in my opinion, to keep buying. There's just some bigger, broader factors that we may not, be able to control that have some uncertainty around them still going forward.
Well, it does feel like the entire sports card market is on sale right now compared to where things were at times last year. I did an episode here on this channel a few weeks ago where I talked about how I literally invested hundreds of thousands of more dollars in sports cards over the last few months. And I was remarking that some of the prices I was buying these cards for were 25% of what the cards were going for a little bit over a year ago. Now, that doesn't mean that they couldn't go down further. They could someday be 25% of what they are today. But I personally feel optimistic that we're somewhere near the floor, and I don't know exactly where the floor is. Nobody knows where the floor is. No one can time a market perfectly. But again, I have enough optimism where prices are today. Thinking long term, as you said, long term, I think that there are some good buys today. How about you, Hammer? Have you been buying? Are you fearful at this point? How are you feeling about things?
So, up to this point, I have been taking it easy, but I am getting to the point now where there's a lot of those PC cards, a lot of those long-term players that I'd like to hold for a long time, where I'm getting comfortable now at pulling the trigger, looking at where these prices were compared to maybe a year or two ago. I mean, and even an example would be for this upcoming NFL season. If you look at some of the veteran NFL quarterbacks like Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, their base PSA 10 rookies are, less than double of what they were going into last season. So I think that gives us an idea of things are starting to level
Probably
out.
less than half, actually.
Yes,
Probably,
yes, yes. Yes, sorry about that. But yeah, so I do think we're at a point now where it's starting to level off, and you can start to see certain plays that can potentially be made. And I do want to add, I think when you look back a few years ago, 2019 draft class, Zion. 2020, you got Joe Burrow, you got Justin Herbert, and I think those really helped keep the momentum in the hobby. Where it seems like this past draft class really wasn't anything to sort of go nuts about compared to those last 2 years. So I'm also optimistic that we'll potentially, from an ultra modern standpoint, get some more generational talent from some of these draft classes moving forward, which can then maybe give a little bit more of that extra push for the ultra modern market.
Yeah, you never know, and if one of these young quarterbacks from this last year develop out. I mean, this is a big year for guys like Trevor Lawrence and
huge.
Trey Lance and Justin Fields and all those guys, right? Mac Jones. And you really need one of those types of guys to break out, to really help fuel the whole entire sports card market this fall. We saw it last year. Literally the football card market kind of rode to highs on the back of Joe Burrow's performances last fall, especially as he got into the playoffs. It really helped fuel the overall market. So hopefully we see some breakout stars this fall, not just in football, but also in basketball. I wanted to mention, we got to move to the next topic, but I wanted to mention the flip game. The flip game is still very alive and well. I've watched my son, we've talked a little more about longer term investing here, but I've watched my son Reeves, even at the National, every day he was making hundreds of dollars by on the show floor of the National by buying a card from this dealer at what he thought was a good price, trading it, and then going and selling that card to somebody. And all of a sudden he ends the day with $400 or $500 more than he started the day with. I'm like, that's wonderful to see. And of course, some people are doing that on a much larger level. When I was out in LA this summer, there were a number of guys who I met out there who, make a living off flipping cards. And I said, how are you doing this in a down sports card market? And they said the key is you never hold a card for longer than a couple of weeks. You got to constantly be turning. Buy at a certain price, try to sell for a couple $1,000s more in the case of high-end cards, and get out of the card, because if you hold it longer, you're subject to the market condition. But if you keep it in a very short period of time, the overall market fluctuations won't really affect you as much.
It's a little bit of hot potato, but it can be fun. And some people really like that, and it's great for young folks collecting to learn how to negotiate. So
absolutely. All right, I want to jump to the next topic. And Teapot, you did a really interesting video this last week on the Market Movers YouTube channel, where you predicted what cards that are currently being produced today, what types of Panini cards specifically, may hold the most value down the road, looking long-term down the road, 5, 10, 20 years down the road. And this, I think, is an important topic because some of us, myself included, Hammer, and I know you have some of these concerns as well, we're all a little bit worried about the number of cards being produced today, the number of parallels that are being created, and whether the supply is going to outweigh the demand long-term from this particular era. But that doesn't mean that every card is suspect and that every card won't hold its value. I think there are some unique ones out there that really could. What did you find as you dove into the data and analyzed this?
Yeah, I think this era could end up being known as the death by parallel era. There's parallels of parallels, and there's all these effects. And we've talked about that a lot on this channel, on Market Movers channel, and Data Dive, I've talked about it. We do suspect that the more iconic True Gold, the Blacks, the Nebulas, other 1s to 50, those should retain value and have popularity for the long term. But there's so many parallels to choose from. We're almost in the inverse of what we saw in the 90s. In the 90s, it was all about inserts and a handful of parallels as refractors began to emerge and things, right? So what do we see today? Because there were so few serial numbered refracting parallels from the 90s, they're all very valuable and sought after. Whereas not all the inserts are valuable and sought after. Even some of the rare ones are not very popular. So I'm trying to flip that script and say, what do we know is iconic and super popular right now with unique designs that are distinct from one another? The insert game hasn't been strong in the Panini era or for Topps at all, frankly. So I'm looking at those ones, and some of them are the ones you'd expect. Color Blast, Downtown, Kaboom, etc. But I unpack some with Court Kings, that are less known, but there's so few of them. They have a strong cult following already and a strong collector base that I do think that they will hold value over time. I think the big problem here is, case hits, and I think maybe you guys unpack this a little bit too. There's something nebulous about them that's like, how many are there really? We don't know, exactly the count. There's some mystique to that, especially on the early year ones. And to me, it's just a lot different than trying to say, like, why should a gold, teal, and chartreuse hyper-reactive elephant parallel be worth, anything when it's stacked up against all these other ones that are very confusing. So that's what I unpacked. Is I think there's eight or so, different inserts, case hits that'll hold value.
Yeah, I do wish they would be a little more transparent around the print runs of the inserts. I'm with you that some of these rare inserts, and not only are they potentially, rare enough to hold value for the long term, but they're also really unique designs. A lot of them are very attractive. The inserts that they're making today, just like a lot of the inserts in the 90s were as well. But there is not that transparency around print runs. People say case hit, but not every insert's a case hit. They are changing, it seems like, the print runs of some of these inserts from year to year, which I also hate. I hate the fact that one year an insert is truly one per case, and then the next year, you start seeing it in every other box. It's like, well, wait a minute, are people going to really remember, 20 years from now, oh, well, that year it was one per case, but the next year, one thing that whenever I talk to the 90s collectors, such as yourself, it seems like anytime you ever show me an insert from the 90s, you always right away recite the pack odds of that insert. You're like, check this insert out, 1 in every 288 packs. This was a great insert, that was 1 in 64. Oh, this insert's cool, but it wasn't that, it was more common. This was 1 in 16 packs. Why don't we have that today?
Yeah, we don't have it.
We need that today, Hammer. We need that today. What's your take on inserts and kind of where that stands today?
Yeah, so even some of the popular inserts, I'm starting to get worried a little bit. I mean, example would be downtown. Right now with downtown, you have a paper downtown in Donruss, you have a chrome downtown in Optic, and then you have a acetate downtown in clearly Donruss. Jeff, when does this end?
And then they created On the Horizon, which looks a lot like downtown. It's just like a horizontal version of downtown.
Yeah,
but
it's like a kaboom downtown fusion. Yeah.
So just from even an entry standpoint, how do I know which one to buy? Which one's the better one to buy? I mean, they all look very similar, but it's just watering down some of the inserts that have been very dominant and popular up to this point. And to your point, we need to have pack odds. I mean, I don't know how many times I talked to collectors and they've said I opened up some Absolute and I pulled 3 kabooms. It just weakens the legitimacy of the term case hit. And I'm hoping that we can get to a future where these pack odds are disclosed so we know how many are out there, which then we can then classify which ones are maybe worth more than others based on scarcity.
I want to see consistency, and Fanatics has talked about their plans for that and setting set identities, and I want to see that. I don't want downtown or kaboom in absolute football and kaboom in Crown Royale basketball and parallels in one and not in the other. Standardize it, make it easy to predict from the sports and set that identity, and I think it would fix a lot of the problems and publish pack odds.
Yeah, fascinating discussion, and if you want to hear more from Teapot and dive into the data that Teapot was looking at, go look at the Market Movers YouTube channel. The last video is there, and it will dive even deeper into this conversation. Okay, guys, we've got to get to our next topic, but before we do, with football starting tonight, this is the ultimate time to be tracking what cards are trending every single week, and the ultimate way to do that is with the Sports Card Investor app. That Sports Card Investor app is free in the App Store, totally free. Go download it right now, search for Sports Card Investor in the App Store. Hammer, we got to get to this next topic. This was suggested by one of you. We read your suggestions in the comments and we use them for topics in next week's show. So go right now into the comments and suggest a topic for next week. This was a great suggestion. And it was about, do young collectors care about the cards of players they never saw play? So this brings up an interesting question. There's been a run, I would say, recently on vintage, where lots and lots of people are kind of turning to vintage cards and they're buying up cards. But will these vintage cards stay relevant forever? Or will some of them maybe drop off in popularity over time as no one left alive has seen any of these players play? Hammer, you're a big baseball guy. Baseball is obviously the biggest sport for vintage. What do you feel about that?
So I think in a nutshell, a lot of those all-star caliber players from the 40s and 60s will become less and less relevant. So I do think to some degree, yes. But one thing that I would have to say is, with this hobby, there's always going to be historians of particular sports and of the hobby itself that are always going to appreciate what came before us and how we were able to get to this point now. I mean, a quote I like to use from the movie The Sandlot is, "Heroes get remembered, but legends never die." So when you're talking about, Mickey Mantle, 52 tops, you're talking about the T206 Wagner. No, I don't think that those cards are going to lose their popularity or they're going to lose your value. We can say the same about Bill Russell or Wilt Chamberlain cards. Even though people haven't seen them play, they understand the impact that those guys were able to put on the sport. And another side of this is scarcity. Back in the day, these cards were not looked at as investments. They're looked at as cards that were taken care of. They were put in the spokes of people's bikes. They were thrown around. So a lot of it comes down to scarcity. And particularly with the T206 and the Mantle, yes, those guys are iconic in their sports. But a big reason why those cards started to become iconic is because the stories of how those cards became scarce. So yes, those guys are GOATs, but I think it's also more than just, I didn't see this guy play, or I wasn't old enough to see. I think some of it is the legacy that has to do with the particular set, the particular card, and obviously the particular player.
Teapot, do you buy into the theory that some of these players people could lose interest in and the cards could lose value over time?
I think when you buy modern cards, you're participating in the present moment, and that's fun. If you're a sports fan, you probably gravitate for sure toward modern. When you buy cards from your childhood, you're participating in collecting nostalgia. And when you buy vintage cards prior to you existing, you're buying history, like Hammer said. That's not going to go away. What will happen over time, though, and I think this is exactly what you were saying, is some of those lesser known players won't be as sought after. Because why? It's a question of saturation. And we're seeing so many new cards printed all the time. There's so much to discover that if I'm, a 12-year-old right now, 90s is vintage to me. So I'm looking at that and I'm, oh wow, 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s, T206, all the way back, right? How do I know what to go after? Some of that stuff is, I think, going to, become sorting the wheat from the chaff. Now, I do encourage people to be curious. Be a curious collector. I wrote an article for Basketball Card Fanatic magazine about that very topic. When you start reading the wiki pages and other things and watching little vignettes on YouTube of these players, and you see that some guy used to be able to pound a nail in with his fist because he was such a tough dude, working on the railroads in the 1930s, there's an emotional connection that happens there that's totally different and distinct from these other cards that are here today. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, this card's been around for 80 years, 90 years, 100 years. That's what's gotten me with the vintage bug. I do think the set collector will always exist too, but not to the extent that it historically has been. And we've seen that fall off in popularity as well. So the more iconic sets will stick around. I would be a little bit concerned about the long-term value of some of the lesser-known sets.
I think the test is this card a historical document, or is this card, just kind of a everyday vintage card? And in my opinion, I've said on this channel before, collecting vintage doesn't interest me as much because of the reason that because I haven't seen some of these people play. But when I look at a 33 Babe Ruth Gowdy, which, I bought the set of this summer, or when I look at like the 51 Mantle, which I bought this year, I look at those cards and I look at them as almost of their historical documents, historical artifacts, more than they're a card of a baseball player.
And legend status.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right, one more topic suggested by you, the audience, defensive stars in the NFL. Why are they undervalued, Hammer? Why do defensive cards not sell for anywhere close to the offensive player equivalents in most cases? And I know you're a big Aaron Donald guy, and this is the case with Aaron Donald amongst many other players. Aaron Donald, arguably the best player playing in the game right now. You could potentially say that, yet his cards are selling for a fraction of a whole bunch of other quarterbacks.
Yeah, so I think naturally in a nutshell, people value offense. This hobby values offensive statistical output. as much as, touchdowns, buckets. Any way to get points on the board is always going to be valued. Now, watching Aaron Donald sack Jimmy Garoppolo to get to the Super Bowl and then watch him sack Joe Burrow to win the Super Bowl, that to me, that was as entertaining as watching any touchdown or any play that I've seen. But the market will always speak for itself, and it's for whatever reason not as valued when you look at some of these defensive players. Now, there are some exceptions. You look at Dick Butkus, you look at Mean Joe Green, and obviously Lawrence Taylor. I do think Aaron Donald is starting to get in that territory. As somebody who collects Aaron Donald, I do see, there's some others that are going after some of his cards that I like. So I do think it's not with everybody, but I also don't think it's specific to just football. We can make this argument with pitching in baseball. We can make this argument with goalkeeping. So I don't think it's just specific necessarily to one sport. It's just that, offensive output and entertainment are really the drivers of why people want to go out and spend big dollars on these cards.
Yeah, those are good points. Do you think this is ever going to change?
In general, most sports gravitate toward offense. Baseball's a little unique with WAR because you factor defense into WAR. There's a few different calculations, but Baseball Reference WAR puts a pretty good emphasis on defense. So a guy like Mookie Betts and some of these other, they're going to see a higher bump to that number. And that plays into your Hall of Fame, eligibility, which plays into your long-term collectability for baseball collectors. They love Hall of Famers. Every other sport is totally different. Part of the problem with football, I think, is when you're on the offensive side of the ball, you have the quarterback, running back, and one or two receivers and maybe a tight end doing something that you take note of, right? They're scoring the points. On defense, you have every player on the field, 11 players on the field, all making plays all the time. A guy who gets 15 sacks in a season, 16 sacks in a season, 17 sacks, one per game, has a remarkable season, might lead the NFL in sacks. That's one play per game in a 60-minute football game that you go, wow, what a beast. And it's true. The part that's crazy is every year we see these top 100 players in the NFL list come out, and Aaron Donald is 1, 2, or 3 on that list every single year, meaning NFL GMs are like, I'd take that guy over, I'd take Justin Herbert right now. In some cases, people might say that. I think it's crazy then that their prices don't go up more. Take a guy like Bruce Smith, and I pulled this right before this. Top 10 defensive player of all time, according to most people. His PSA 10 1986 Fleer, iconic set for football, Pop 36, sells $2,500 to $2,800. A raw Trevor Lawrence Tiger Stripe Select sold for $3K in the same time frame. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I think there's got to be some correction there in the long term.
That's funny. That's a funny comparison.
And hey, hopefully, we've seen wide receivers and running back markets start to get more attention over the past year or two. So maybe as the hobby continues to grow, maybe we'll start to see some more love for maybe those top defensive guys.
Yeah. Hey, then someday the offensive lineman. Someday.
That's right.
It might be 50 years from now, but maybe someday you too will get some love from the sports card hobby. Probably not. Probably never going to happen with you. But hey, we'll start with the defensive players and go from there. Hey guys, thanks for those suggestions for topics. If you've got a suggestion for next week, please leave it in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this episode, guys, give us a like right now. Hit that subscribe button. And if you don't have the Sports Card Investor app on your phone with football starting tonight, don't you want to open it up tomorrow and see what cards are trending tomorrow and this weekend after all the games are played? Of course you do, because it's free. So go download it right now, the Sports Card Investor app in the App Store, or just open it up if it's already on your phone. And enjoy football tonight, enjoy football this weekend. We'll see you soon with our next episode. Take care.